Okay, we do skip around a little bit in our book. So we do section 1.2, and then I like to immediately jump into chapter 9, which is a little out of order. Ordinarily, we would cover 1.2, 5.6, chapter 6, chapter 7, chapter 8, chapter 9, and then 11 and 12. So we skip around a little bit, but I like to do chapter 9 first. The reasons are it's not too bad. Okay. It ties in really nicely to rounding. We have to do a good bit of rounding in this section, but it's just not the hardest stuff we're going to do. And it's a lot of review. So I think it's just kind of a nice, gentle way to start this class. So, chapter 9, only 3 sections. We're going to start with measuring length. And then we're also going to look at the metric system. So there are largely two measurement systems that we use in the US. There's what we call the US or the English system. That's what we're used to, like feet, inches, miles, pounds and ounces, gallons, quarts, pints, that kind of stuff. And then there's the metric system. So the metric system is the one that has meters, liters, and grams. Okay. We use both in the US. So we're going to understand how to convert within the US system, how to separately convert within the metric system, and then how to convert between the two systems. Okay. So in this section, we're going to look at length. I will let you know that there's one massive typo when we start looking at quarts. That was just an oops on my part. I was copying and pasting and pasted something in the wrong spot, but it'll be all right. All right, so topic 1, converting US system units of length. Okay, so we're looking very much at the US system, which is inches, feet, yards, and miles. Okay. Now I love to start with a definition. So we definitely have a few definitions here to look at. So when we convert within the US system, we're ultimately doing something called dimensional analysis. I have to explain it kind of more from a math perspective, but if you see this in like a science class, it's exactly the same thing. I'm just doing it a little bit more mathy because we're in a math class, okay? But we have dimensional analysis. I'm going to skip a definition. I'm going to jump straight to dimensional analysis. Dimensional analysis is the process of multiplying a unit of measure by one or more, what we call unit fractions, to convert to a different unit of measure. It's kind of wordy, but you're basically it's how we convert. And so essentially what you're doing is you're multiplying an initial unit by one or more unit fractions. Well, unit fractions are a fraction made up of two different units of measure that represent the same amount. Okay, so technically these fractions have a value of 1. So a unit fraction is a fraction that has a value of 1 but is made up of two different units of measure. So let's think about that for a second. Let's talk just feet and inches. So we know that one length of a foot is equal to exactly 12 inches. Those are two different units of measure, but they represent the same length. So technically, if I take a foot and I divide it by some equivalent value that equals a foot, I have a fraction that equals 1. So I could create a unit fraction with feet and inches. They are different units of measure, but they represent the same amount. So they have a value of 1. Okay? Now, so we have the idea of unit fraction and dimensional analysis. We will always use dimensional analysis when we're converting within the US system of measure. We will also use dimensional analysis when we convert between US and metric. So we're going to use dimensional analysis a lot. You will definitely see this in your science classes for sure. Okay. Now, common units in the US system for length are inches, feet, yards, and miles. Okay. So let's go ahead and start with our examples. All right. So example 1 says, write two unit fractions that can be used to convert between the given units of measure. So it's not just enough to know that you have a unit fraction. You have to be very mindful in your unit fraction of where you put a specific unit of measure. And I'll explain why when we actually start to convert. So if I need to create two unit fractions, I need a fraction, I need the same value in the numerator and denominator, or the same amount in the numerator or denominator so that my fraction equals 1, but I need to make sure they have two different units, inches and feet. Well, I already know that 1 foot is the same exact amount as 12 inches. So this is a unit fraction. This fraction technically has a value of 1. Okay? Now I could write almost the exact same fraction, just flip it upside down. So instead of having 1 foot in the numerator, I could say, okay, I have 12 inches divided by 1 foot. And again, that has a value of 1 because 12 inches is the same length as 1 foot. Okay? So get used to the abbreviations. You'll see a lot of abbreviations. Inches is just IN. Sometimes you'll see IN period. And then feet or foot would just be FT. Okay. Now, feet and miles. I'm not pulling these out of thin air. I will provide you with a conversion sheet in class, and I'll show you one here in just a moment. But for feet and miles, I happen to know there are 5,280 feet in a mile. So I could write 5,280 feet over 1 mile. Miles are MI. That's the abbreviation for miles. So 5,280 feet is the exact same length as 1 mile. So we have a fraction that technically equals 1. Now, depending on the situation, we may need the miles in the numerator and the feet in the denominator. So we could write almost the same thing, just flip your fraction. So I get 1 mile is exactly the same thing as 5,280 feet. So those are examples of unit fractions. Okay. Now, for example 2, we're going to do some actual converting. All right. Example 2 says perform each conversion, include correct units with your final answer. You do need to be very mindful of that. Math is very specific. It's very technical. Okay. We can't just throw around numbers. We need to show our work. We need to be nice and linear with our work. We need to be able to follow our work, is what I mean. And we need to make sure our final answer has correct units. Okay. So here's how we convert. Now, remember, I'm a math teacher, so I'm coming from this idea of dimensional analysis from like a slightly more mathy perspective. I can show you what it would look like in a science class. They're almost identical, so don't worry. All right. But what we do is we start with what we know. We know that we have here, for example 2, part A, we have 78 inches. All right. So I want to start with 78 inches, but I want to write it as a fraction. So I'm just going to say 78 inches over 1. Now, dimensional analysis by definition tells us that we're going to multiply by one or more unit fractions. So a fraction where the top and the bottom represent the same amount, they're just different units of measure. So since I'm converting inches to feet, I need to make sure my unit fraction talks about inches and feet. But I want to get rid of inches and convert to feet. So when I multiply by my unit fraction, I quite literally want the inches, the unit inches to cancel, and I want feet to be left over in the numerator. So when I set up my unit fraction, I have to set it up in such a way that feet are in the numerator and inches are in the denominator. The unit you're trying to get rid of in this case needs to be on the denominator, so literally inches will cancel, and I'll be left with my desired feet in the numerator. Okay, so if we clean this up a little bit, I get 78 times 1, which is just 78 feet. And then in the denominator, I just get 1 times 12, or 12. And then I can go to a calculator. So if you've got a calculator, get it out. I can go to a calculator and do 78 divided by 12, which is 6.5. So I can say now pretty confidently that 78 inches is equal to 6.5 feet. Okay. Now, if you were going to see dimensional analysis in a science classroom, sometimes they don't write this as like specific fractions. They're doing the exact same thing. So behind the scenes, they're really multiplying by unit fractions. It just may look a little different. You'll sometimes see charts like this where they have 78 inches and then they have 12 inches and they have 1 foot. Inches cancel, we're left with a foot. So that tells them they get 78 divided by 12 feet. It's the same thing. They just don't put the individual fractions. You'll just see kind of like a grid instead, but it's the same exact process. All right, finally, we've got 4 miles to inches. Now, I happen to know that there's a conversion for feet to inches and there's a conversion for feet to miles, but there's not a conversion that takes me from like inches to miles, okay? And just so you can kind of start getting used to seeing this, the conversion sheet that I'm going to give you all in person, or if you're in an online class, you can print it on your own, but the conversion sheet for this class looks like this. Let me pull it up. Some of these we know, like we generally know feet and inches, so I haven't shown it to you yet. But this is the chapter 9 conversions. We have conversions for length, area, and volume, and then capacity. Capacity, we generally think of like liquid measurements, okay? And then weight, okay? So we have length, area, and volume. That includes the capacity. And then we have weight and then temperature, but temperature is kind of its own thing, okay? We're talking about length. All right. So the first column is just the US measurements. And then for length over on the right-hand side, we have measurements that'll take us from the English or the US system to the metric system. We'll worry about that later. For now, we're just interested in this first little column. So we can see that 12 inches is 1 foot. Okay, we've talked about that already. We can see that 3 feet is 1 yard. That's great. We can see that 36 inches is 1 yard. Also great. And then we have that 5,280 feet equals 1 mile. Well, that's great. What we don't have is a specific conversion that takes us from inches to miles, but that's okay because we can convert inches to feet. Then we can convert feet to miles. And that's what we're going to end up doing here. Okay, so keep this in mind. We know that 12 inches is 1 foot, and then we know 5,280 feet is 1 mile. We're going to need both of those conversions. Okay, so we need to convert 4 miles to inches. So I think I told you we're going to go inches to feet and then feet to miles. We're actually going to do that backwards. We're going to go miles to feet and then feet to inches. So in this case, we're going to have two unit fractions. Okay, so start with what you know. We know we have 4 miles. We can't convert miles directly to inches, but we can convert miles to feet, and then we can convert feet to inches. And notice how I have units that I want to cancel top versus bottom. So if I were going to cancel units, miles would cancel top to bottom, feet would cancel top to bottom, and then my final desired unit should be in the numerator. Okay, so let's just fill in some numbers and then simplify. So I know there are 5,280 feet to 1 mile. I also know there are 12 inches to 1 foot. All right. So if I were to clean this up, my numerator would be 4 times 5,280 times 12 inches. And then my denominator really just 1, so it's not going to do anything for me. So if you've got your calculator, get your calculator out. I can certainly go to the virtual calculator, but for simple stuff like this, I don't typically switch screens back and forth too much. So I have 4 times 5,280 times 12. And then I would technically divide that by 1, but when you divide by 1, nothing really happens. So our final answer is that there are 253,440 inches in 4 miles. Now, if you were in a science class, I'm not always going to do this. I'm going to show you this one, and then I'm not going to show it to you like this again. But what you would see in a science class, or like maybe one of the math tutors, they may show you this. They'd be like, okay, we have 4 miles. We need to convert miles to feet, and then we need to convert feet to inches. They would fill in the numbers, they would cancel stuff, and then they would know that just multiply across. So they would still get the same exact answer. They may just do it as a grid instead of multiplying individual fractions. They mean the same thing, so don't be alarmed if you see kind of the grid that I showed you down here below. All right, so that is it for converting length in the US system. Next up, we're going to look at converting length in the metric system. There is that one typo I had. And then we will look at converting between US and metric. I think that's actually where my typo is. Okay, so next up, topic 2, we'll look at the metric system.